All right. I believe we are finally live here. Sorry, guys, that we were a little bit late today. Well, meaning me, I was a little late today. The content I was putting together, it ended up being a little bit trickier to get it to all fit together than I thought. So yeah, it was one of those things where I'm glad I'm doing these things as a live stream, because this was one of those presentations that I could have, just let take forever to do. But I think we got something really sweet here that we're going to get into. We're going to be really going deep on willpower and how it works. And I'm going to be telling you a little bit about some of my journey too, about how I have, come to the conclusions that I have in relation to how we can actually optimize our capacity to get the most out of our free will, of our willpower. Because, it seems super simple and obvious on the surface, but from what I found, it's the opposite. In fact, willpower is very weird and free will itself is very strange. And so we're going to be doing a nice thorough look at all of this. But my hope is that by the end of this, you're going to be walking away lighter, freer, happier, and have a lot more power in your own life. In particular, I want you to walk away from this knowing exactly how you should be spending your willpower. Because if we can get, we all have a finite amount of just, juice in us to focus on things and make stuff happen. And if you can focus in on these they're just two tiny variables, then everything else in your life, I think, will start falling into place much, much more smoothly. So let's see what we got in here. Luke, what's up? Lukers, Lewis, Paysev, what's up, guys? Yeah, the ultimate content machine. I'll take that one. I wasn't able to really peruse the internet much to see what's going on in the world. So I don't have any random stuff to react to. I wish I did. But maybe we can do that at the end, depending on how long it takes to get through all this. So if you guys got any ideas, either stick around or drop them in here. Lewis says, what role does willpower play in resolving self-sabotage? All of the role, pretty much. Yeah, it's kind of everything. I mean, if you that, and I guess you could call it grace or luck, those two things together are pretty much what's going to do it. But you got to know how to make it work. So, all right, I think we can go ahead and get this thing set up here. Let's get this presentation opened. Okay. Of course, you're going to hide my other notes. There we go. We got some videos to watch this time too. Alex has been watching since Sacred Sexuality Project. Fantastic. Long time follower then. That's always wild. That's the coolest thing. When I've I've been doing this stuff for so long now that I'll get people who've been following me for 10 years and stuff, and it's wild. It's really cool because usually they're in completely different areas of their life now, and they'll tell me about their journey a little bit. So that's sweet, man. Glad you're here. Okay, so let's get into this thing. All right. So why am I doing a video on willpower? Well, I mean, to be honest with you, willpower has been one of these things that's always extremely fascinated me, but also frustrated me. Probably nothing more in my life has interested me and frustrated me more than this. Because, I mean, if you think about it, if you're self-developmentally minded and you zoom out, well, willpower is the most important concept, right? Because if you can choose to change your life, that mechanism of choice, that's kind of everything outside of, luck or grace, whatever you want to call it. Okay. And so if you can get yourself to make good decisions, then you can give yourself the best shot at living the best life possible. But the problem that we all know is how difficult it can be to get yourself to actually make that good decision, right? And take those good actions. And so my journey with all this stuff, it actually started way back when I was 14 years old, and I had just gotten dumped by my girlfriend. And I had like, crushed on this girl for forever. And I was like, head over heels, the fact that she was dating me, she was like a grade older than me and stuff like that. But then when she graduated 8th grade and went to high school, she dumped me, which, is not surprising looking back. But, me back then I was just devastated. I was just crushed. But I didn't really let myself feel any of that stuff. And I actually like repressed all of it. And then I kind of went on like this split trajectory. On like one side, this was unconscious, but on one side I was like, all right, I'm going to decide to be so good. I'm going to be like so awesome that no one's ever going to reject me again. But then simultaneously, I fell very heavily into porn and video games. And I think, looking back on it, it's probably like as a way to cope with those feelings and of inadequacy that I never really addressed. But the other side of it, the part that wanted to be good, that part got super, super into self-improvement. And like, I started reading self-help books like Psycho-Cybernetics and all this other kind of stuff. And so like these two paths of me, this indulgent porn, video gaming, lazy guy, and then this super, obsessive self-development guy, they were like going in opposite direction. They were always like at war with each other. And it was at this point I realized, hold on, like what's going on here? Why can't I just get myself to do what I want to do? Why can't I get myself to get out there and just, play basketball and practice so I can be a better player on the team? Why can't I get myself to just like always, study for my tests or get my assignments done so I can get better grades? Why can't I get myself to show up, cool, relaxed and things like that, and instead, spaz out and, be weird and things like that, right? Like, why can I not control this even though I know what I want to have happen? And so this like tension existed for a long time inside of me. And in this process, like I've been studying this like literally since I was 14. So it's like, 21 years now. And I've learned a lot. And I'm going to try and take you through some of the journey that I went on to help you get to the conclusions that I'm at now, because I'm incredibly happy with the conclusions of how this all works. I was completely lost. And like my core anger at God was this idea of like, you tell me to be good, but then I don't have the power to be good. This is bullshit. To now feeling very peaceful, very in control, very free in my life. And so I want you guys to reach this same place. And a lot of the stuff I learned through studying, some of it was my own discovery. A lot of it was just through, working with the thousands of guys that I've worked with as a professional men's coach over the years. But we're going to start diving into this now, but the overall goal is I want to show you how to use your willpower in a way that actually works and lets you be free. That's really it. That's where we're trying to get to. Okay. So this is the weird guide to willpower, or actually, no, that's not what it is. That's the old title. The new title is the, I can't even see the title now. It was the Unconventional Guide to Willpower Maxing. That's way better, right? Yeah, we're going to go with that one. But I want to just kind of set up with like showing you like the core misinterpretation of what operating from a place of like powerful will looks like. Because I had this this confusion myself. Like when I finally got this, it was kind of startling. It kind of sets up the vibe is like when you really get how willpower works, it's much more like what you saw there from Saitama, where things are light, okay? But you can get incredibly serious. You can get very, intense if you need to. And so that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get the highest, get this thing back up, highest positive return on willpower spent and sense of freedom gained. And if we can do this right, well then we've got ourselves something pretty awesome. Yeah, OPM does rule. All right, next piece here. So when I started like doing this stuff and I kept getting frustrated with my inability to show up, be the man that I wanted to be and that sort of thing, I started thinking that like, well, one, is my willpower broken? Is there something wrong with me? Which actually led to a deeper and kind of darker, scarier question. And that was what kind of sent me down the rabbit hole, as it were, in terms of this whole discovery process. And so that led me to determinism and this idea of free will. Does it even exist? And I think this is like, this isn't absolutely necessary for us to discuss for the sake of this, but I think it's worth it, because a lot of guys, they struggle with this sort of deterministic mindset and often the nihilistic mentality that comes along with it. And if you take any of this stuff seriously, chances are you will start to consider these questions. And so what is determinism? Okay, so we can do a little quick video here that does a good job of breaking it down.
What is determinism? Broadly construed, determinism is a theory or doctrine which holds the belief that occurrences of nature, social or psychological phenomena, and acts of the will are causally determined by preceding events or natural laws. In other words, determinism believes that all events, whether involving inanimate matter or conscious beings like humans, are completely determined by previous events.
It's basically saying everything is
Hence,
predetermined.
if one knows the physical state of the universe completely at any given moment, and all physical laws, one could, in principle, predict the future perfectly, including the so-called free actions of human beings.
So it's like, you see here, it's like this, everything in life is like a set of dominoes. And like at the beginning of the universe, this entire massive, incredibly complex set of dominoes was all set up, and everything's just falling down from there. And when I first sort of came across this idea, I was like, damn it, that makes a lot of sense. And that really threw me for a big loop for a little while, because it felt like I had no control over my life. It felt like, everything that I do, it doesn't really matter. There's no such thing as free will. There's no such thing then as willpower. It's all just going to be cause and effect, like ping pong balls, like bouncing off of each other, right? And so that really got me upset for a little while. And that is until I started going down the route of the New Age stuff. Because basically it's like that whole willpower thing, like the determinism stuff, it stopped me dead. And I was just like, shit, I can't think about this, because I was getting depressed and just lethargic and not in a good place, mentally speaking. And I know there's some more positive takes on determinism and stuff like that. But for me, I just couldn't make those click. There's this idea that, well, yeah, maybe you're not free, but you should pretend like you're free because it'll make you happier. Or that free will and determinism are both true. You can be free and also in a deterministic system. And to me, that didn't make any sense either. So neither of those really worked for me. So I just kind of shelved that whole idea. And then I moved into just studying New Age stuff because I thought it was interesting. I thought it was cool. And when I went down that path, everybody there was they're relatively kind of happy, although they were kind of weird too. They all kind of had this New Age wide eye thing, and they would either be overly kind, or they would be they would talk in their guru voice, they're seeing off into infinity. And just side note, if anyone has a particular affect like that, you can see it with the guru voice or the New Age, or even the you see it on the Christian side too, the people who talk in their preacher's voice. It's as soon as you adopt an affect like that, you're already working uphill with me. Something's off. And I generally don't trust you, because if you're already putting on an act, then I know you're performing and, you're not being just real with me. Regardless. Okay. The one thing that the New Age people had that was interesting is that they couldn't shut up about quantum mechanics. And I thought this was very interesting, because they kept saying that quantum mechanics were this and that. They're the key to having superpowers and all this other kind of stuff. But what I was mostly interested in is well, what does this mean for the free will stuff? And that's where I got some hope. So here, let's go to this video now. And this guy, like, for all the quantum stuff, and even I'm going to mention a math thing later, I'm out of my depth. Okay, like I'm no physicist, I'm no mathematician, so I defer to people who are smarter than me, or at least to ChatGPT, who can, at least query those smarter people. But here's some famous physicist talking about quantum mechanics and determinism.
Newtonian determinism says that the universe is a clock, a gigantic clock that's wound up at the beginning of time, and it's been ticking ever since according to Newton's laws of motion. So what you're going to eat 10 years from now on January 1st has already been fixed. It's already known using Newton's laws of motion. Right. Einstein believed in that. Einstein was a determinist. Does that mean that a murderer, a horrible mass murderer, isn't really guilty of his works because it was already preordained billions of years ago? And Einstein said, well, yeah, in some sense that's true. Even mass murderers were predetermined. But he said they should still be placed in jail. Heisenberg then comes along and proposes the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and says, nonsense. There's uncertainty. You don't know where the electron is. It could be here, here, or many places simultaneously. This, of course, Einstein hated because he said God doesn't play dice with the universe. Well, hey, get used to it. Einstein was wrong. God does play dice. Every time we look at an electron, it moves. There's uncertainty with regards to the position of the electron. So what does that mean for free will? It means in some sense we do have some kind of free will. No one can determine your future events given your past history. There's always the wild card. There's always the possibility of uncertainty in whatever we do. So when I look at myself in a mirror, I say to myself, what I'm looking at is not really me. It looks like me, but it's not really me at all. It's not me today, now. It's me a billionth of a second ago, because it takes a billionth of a second for life.
Yeah, I don't know what he's talking about there. But now, so this quantum thing, why was this a big deal for me? Well, it was a big deal because it proved, it seems pretty, much accepted across all scientific, consensus that the universe is not actually fully deterministic. Mostly it is, but it's not fully, okay? And that was enough for me to at least, crack open this door back into willpower again, because it's like, all right, now there's a chance. There's a fighting chance. And it's not a perfect chance because, of this. This is a comment on that actual video where the guy said, well, I wouldn't call the randomness in quantum mechanics our free will, since we do not determine the outcome of the random process. And that's a good point, right? And like, I don't really have, basically it's like, I don't know the mechanism, right? And the chances like that we could have some kind of quantum computing in our brain, maybe through some act of will or something we have actual control over, we can stir up some kind of quantum event that causes an electron to go down this neural pathway rather than this neural pathway. The scientific community, mixed on that, mostly negative. They don't think the brain can do things like that. But I don't know, there's enough uncertainty there to where we don't know. And so I'm going to run with it, because even people who believe in determinism believe that you have to run with free will on some level, or else you're going to end up very depressed and dysfunctional. So moving forward, we're going to assume that free will exists, on an objective level, at least possibly, because we have to assume that, because we don't know for certain it doesn't exist. But we're going to, for practical purposes, we're going to just assume that it's there because we need it anyway. Orbital Hub says pineal gland would be the gateway. Maybe. I don't know. Ehab says, I think you would enjoy the work of late Catholic philosopher Wolfgang Smith. I'll have to check him out. Yeah. Pei says, universe is way too complex to be deterministic. It's deterministic in some regards, stochastic or chaotic in others. Yeah. So basically, I think there's a good argument to be made that, yeah, there's some wiggle room in the system. So, what we're going to be operating with moving forward is that free will exists, but most things are deterministic. All right. And I think we can all agree with that, that like cause and effect, it tends to carry out. Right. And I'm not going to go down the whole philosophical rabbit holes of non-duality and that, cause and effect is just an illusion, all this kind of stuff. Like I went there. It just ends up being like a big masturbatory, like, I think waste of time. But the thing that we got to get at is like, if there is some little bit of wiggle room in here where things are not deterministic, how can we generate maximum positive change from that bit of wiggle room? And so the Sam Harrises of the world, they decide, I'll use logic. And then they feel really cool doing that. And I know because I was this guy. And it's like, I'm going to be this logical dude, and that's how I'm going to take care of everything. And the idea is basically like this. It's like logic exists up at the top of the hierarchy. And by using our logic, aka our prefrontal cortex, we can use it to override or reorganize our emotional states in our limbic system. And then if we can do that properly, then we can lead ourselves to taking good, positive action. Seems pretty sensible. Seems pretty logical, right? But there's some issues with it, okay? And the first issue is that what I would call the is-ought problem. So what the heck is the is-ought problem? I tried to find like a good, concise video explaining this, but they were all kind of lame. So I'm going to try and do my best to explain this to you. Basically, the idea is that logic can solve for X, but it can't tell you what X should represent. So if we're just talking about, a math equation, 5 plus X equals 6, well then what's X? Okay, it's 1, right? 5 plus 1 equals 6. And most mathematics and logic is pretty much just more complex versions of that, right? And logic's really good at doing those kinds of things. But what's a counterexample to where this fails? So like, say we want to go to our friend. Well, this is not the counterexample. This is just another example of how logic works. So like the shortest path to your friend's house, because you want to get there quick. He's got a new video game and you want to play it with him. And so, you can put it into Google Maps, and Google Maps can run an algorithm that'll tell you the shortest path there. Boom. Awesome. Logic is amazing. But what if you want to figure out your life path? Okay. Well, the path, we're like, well, what variables are we going to optimize for? How do we do that? Do we want to make the most money? Well, that could be a pretty straightforward equation if you think about it long enough. Or what if we want to, maximize fun, or we want to maximize work-life balance, or we want to, maximize our ability to make positive impact on the world, or we want to maximize our ability to enjoy things. Or maybe you want to do all of those, right? That's usually the issue, is that then we got a bunch of variables we're trying to solve for, and we don't know how are we going to weight all of these? How are we going to organize them all? And eventually logic just peters out, and we are left with no direction. We don't know what we're doing. And what I found is that most important life decisions, they're not ones that can be solved purely with logic. And so when I'm trying to construct my whole discipline mentality off of like, find the most logical thing, get my emotions to deal with it and do it, it starts getting really difficult, right? I don't know what people are saying in the chat. You're being absurd. Limehouse, watch it. I won't ban you if you're going to get, it might be just a cheeky response to someone in there, but careful. Timothy says, I don't want to hear from chat. Well, I'm going to check in with them. I'm going to make an edited version of this eventually. But I want to see where people are at, see if you guys are following. Like if you have questions about any of this stuff along the way, or you got comments on it, feel free to share, because I am going to dip in. So the next issue with logic is that overriding emotions with logic tends to lead to dysfunctional behavior. And this is something that I came to learn in excruciating detail in my own life, and then also with the countless dudes now that I've coached. Okay. And so what does this mean? So if your logic is supposed to sit as the king atop of the mountain, telling everybody else what to do, what that typically amounts to is your emotions just getting overridden, right? It's like, all right, well, the logical thing for me to do right now is to get up early and get to work, right? And you keep doing that and you apply that to everything. It's like, well, the logical thing for me to do is to not eat that sweet and to instead eat my vegetables and lean meat. And the logical thing for me to do is to skip going out and seeing my friends and to get this extra work done, because if I just grind 80 hours a week for the next 2 years, I could retire. And that would be the most logical thing. And then I could have as much fun as I want with my friends, right? If you keep going on like this, what tends to happen is that your emotions, they rebel. And what you do then is you just kind of fall into escapism. And so like my whole thing was, when I was first kind of like getting out of my dysfunctional states, was quitting porn was like the first big thing I needed to do, because porn used all of my, energy, not all of it, but like that was a big bunch of it, right? Like I couldn't get my business going. I couldn't focus. I couldn't like be productive. I couldn't like really just be the guy that I wanted to be. And I noticed that when I just tried to logically override my desire to use porn, it actually led to more porn use. And so something was wrong with that. And I've seen that over and over again. A guy who just tries to squash emotion for the supremacy of logic doesn't really get him very far, particularly in any sort of deeper habit change. James Watson says repression builds up and eventually explodes. Absolutely. It's kind of like you keep trying to like stuff emotion into a trash bag, but eventually the trash bag can't like hold it anymore. And it comes out in a completely uncontrolled manner, like this, puts garbage all over your floor, metaphorically. Crap says the limiting factor of logic is the amount of variables it can calculate. But if somehow your logic could calculate infinite variables, well, yeah, I mean, like we can make up whatever sort of fantastic scenario we'd like and operate in that. But we're trying to operate in the real world. All right, little mouse, you done? I'm gonna put you in timeout. See if you can behave. Put you in a 10-minute timeout. Okay. So then we got another issue here with logic. And this one, I think, is very important, even if it doesn't necessarily seem as important on paper. And that is, it leads to like logic, like overemphasizing logic makes you feel like a robot, and it makes you feel less free. And personally, the whole reason I was interested in willpower and discipline and that sort of thing is because I wanted to feel free, right? I wanted to feel like I was free to be like the best version of myself, the man that I really wanted to be. And the more that I tried to just crank on my logic, the less free I felt. The more, and even when I succeeded, so because sometimes you can get really good at repressing your emotions. And then you just become like this super buttoned up, locked down, like robotic like person. You lose your warmth, and also you lose like your ability to enjoy things, because what this comes to is like overliving in your prefrontal cortex and then not really letting your limbic system activate very well. So you stop getting the joy out of life, even if you're doing good things. And it sucks, frankly, and it's not really worth experiencing if you're interested in it. And this is one of those like things that so many guys they want to be able to become this like machine, and you really don't. You really don't. It's not fun. Paysevs, yeah. Also, how are you supposed to kick ass without emotional energy? Duh, exactly. So if submitting to logic alone isn't the answer, well then what is? Great question, Sam. So desire, aka emotion, should be your core driver. That's the first big thing, first big insight here. All right. And so I want to show you guys a cool video. This is actually a video made by a fellow YouTuber and friend, Joey, over at Better Ideas. And he's a much more successful YouTube channel than me, and he's actually like a very skilled filmmaker. And this is one of my favorite things that I've ever seen him make. So we're gonna watch some of this here.
Ah, what a lovely weekend in the neighborhood. Susan is out walking the dog, Frank is hard at work writing his new book, and Billy is... Ah, yes.
That's Joey,
a classic
by the way.
Billy Saturday. Waking up late, his mind filled with dread. There are so many things he could do, so many things he should do, but it all just seems so hard for Billy. His obligations crush him, so he does what seems easy. He passes the time on frivolous things that take little to no effort to do. He thinks of his neighbor Frank, industriously engaged in his pursuits.
So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, but basically it's like Billy's undisciplined and unhappy with it, and he, Frank over here is, killing it, and Billy's upset about it. So the interesting part here, for our cases, what was it, 449, right about here. Billy asks a very important question.
Was bad as well.
But why does it feel just so gosh darn unappealing to do what I need to do before I do it?
That's the key, right? Why do we not want to do the good things for us? Why do we feel like we need to use our willpower in the first place?
Billy, you've asked the most important question of all. Let me introduce to you the sinister nature of should. You see, highly ambitious people are rebellious by nature, wanting to rise above mediocrity and not be a sheep. This rebelliousness means we don't like it when somebody says, "You should do this." When an ambitious person hears authoritative language like this, they tend to do the opposite.
I don't let anyone tell me what to do.
We know, Billy. You are very strong and cool. But as you know, just like finally writing that paper, what we think we should do is often what we want to do anyways. It actually feels good to do what we need to do. So telling ourselves we should do it is no help at all, is it? What would you rather do, Billy? What you should do or what you want to do?
I want to do what I want to do.
Yes, Billy. And what if it is the same thing? What should you call that thing to make sure you do it?
I don't get it.
Goodness gracious, Billy, you're so close, son. All I'm saying is that you don't have to play this silly little game with your mind anymore. You can simply do what you want.
I can?
Yes, Billy.
I can do what I want.
Billy? Billy, wait!
This is what most of us believe will happen if we let ourselves do what we want. But then it all comes crashing down, right?
Hello? Are you still there?
Ah, Billy. Nice to see you again. Are you having fun?
We all know this feeling.
I don't feel so good.
Well, Billy, what happened?
You said I could do what I wanted, so I did what I wanted.
And how did it feel, Billy? Do you feel good now?
I just
Do you feel good now that you've put more time into that thing?
You said I could...
Circling the lamp like a good little moth, trying to drink the light. But your wings grow heavy as you flitter and flutter. alone in the dead of night.
What?
Sorry.
So we're going to come back to that in a second. But this is a great like segue into what we want to be talking about here, because it's like, okay, if we can't just operate off of what we quote unquote should, which is, you know, this whole logical idea, we want to try and come from what we want. But obviously, like when we're coming from where we want, the danger is that we then just let ourselves completely go after, you know, impulsive sort of things that don't really serve us. And it's interesting to me that when you look at some of the different philosophies out there, like what do they promote? Well, if you're familiar with like Satanism and occultism and stuff like that, there's a famous idea in here, and it's do what thou wilt. That is the whole of the law. And that's by Aleister Crowley. You know, he's a famous occultist. I don't know if he was technically a Satanist. I don't know if that happened later or what. I don't know. But basically, it's just like do whatever the hell you want to do whenever you want to do it. And that would be, you know, the opposite, the total polar opposite of this concept of, you know, learning, like operating purely from logic. Just like be a chaotic, free spirit in a sense, and don't let anything try to constrict you. But that puts us in a position where it's like, that sounds terrible. Also trying to live like a robot and failing also sounds terrible. So like, what do we got to do? So this is where Joey's video also does a very good job.
Billy, don't you see? You're confusing your true desires in life with compulsion. Companies all around the world spend billions upon billions of dollars every single year to make things seem enticing on the surface, but these things make you feel worse after having done them, instead of better. Doesn't sound very enjoyable to me. You see, Billy, they are traps of compulsion, but if you can identify these traps, you can avoid them. It's quite simple, Billy.
That's really true. That's a really good point in the sense that like there is an entire system out there. Like the most of the modern ecosystem which we operate is hell bent on getting you to serve their agenda rather than your actual best interest. And so like if we don't have an awareness of that kind of stuff, it'll jack you up. I mean, you know, the one thing he didn't show in there were obviously because he couldn't would be like, you know, all the porn clips and sexualized media out there. That's one of those things that I've been helping guys with for so long. It's like, it's so normalized and they just get these little hooks into your limbic system, into your emotions that make you think that you want these things, right? But those are not your actual desires. Those are compulsions. Those are impulses. Those are cravings. And they're not truly what you want. And so there's a distinction here between what you truly want and then what you might have an impulse to act upon.
You get it now, don't you? Let's go back to Frank, who you admire so much. Frank is able to properly identify what activities are truly fulfilling. He recognizes the difference between compulsion and genuine satisfaction. He fills his time with things that make him feel good as a person. He knows that draining 5 hours into a manufactured entertainment contraption actually doesn't make him feel
can you
good,
play those outside?
despite what the marketing might
That might
say.
be the saddest thing
So
I've
it's
ever
not
seen.
that
If I ever
Frank
saw
has
someone do
less
that.
fun. He actually has more.
But maybe it's better
more
doing that
satisfaction,
than instant.
more self-assurance, more happiness. When you have this proper context, when you see the truth, then you can simply do what brings you happiness and fulfillment through and through. Reflect on what these things are for you and your life and dive into them fully, guilt-free. Free from the burden of fruitless moral imperative, you will naturally want to do the things you originally thought you only should do. You will begin to realize that you don't need more willpower to be like Frank. Willpower has nothing to do with it. It's simply living with clarity, with truth. When you do what you want and what you want feels good, you will know that you have unbrainwashed yourself. It will feel better to be you. The world is simply a better place when people aren't so confused about what makes them happy. Do you understand now, Billy? Where? Oh, Billy, you are capable of so much more.
So yeah, I love that video. And it brings up some interesting questions too. Because like, obviously that's the ideal state. We want to be in a place where what we want is also what logically makes the most sense for us. But it's a little bit trickier getting there than just, unbrainwashing yourself. Like, you kind of glossed over that piece. And like, how do you get yourself to do that? How do you get yourself over that hump? How do you get your, dopamine conditioned to come from good things when it's already hooked in maybe bad things, right? So let's see what the chat's saying here. Yeah. Yeah, I'll make sure I link all these videos when I have have it done. All right. So on to our next piece here. So let's just do kind of like a bit of a summary of what we've gotten so far. How should we use our willpower? Well, we could use willpower as override, to try and use our logic to override our emotional impulses. And this is like a flexing and forceful sort of activity, but it leaves you wrecked. Or we could use willpower in a different way to center ourselves. We're going to use our psychological energy to access our deeper desires, right? So instead of just forcing a logical agenda, we are going to use our energy to understand what we actually want. And this is, instead of really forceful, it's actually it's relaxing. It's like chilling out. It's about like learning how to pop out of the compulsion part of ourselves. Like, you can think of our compulsions and our habits and our immediate reactions as like these puppet strings that are attached to us. And they're puppet strings of tension that go through our, neurochemical system all the way into our musculature until we are like a slave to these sort of patterns. And by relaxing, we start to break that hold of that pattern on us. And this is what I believe really allows us to access our true power in a sustainable way. So, like, just to kind of give you a visual, going back to what we looked at earlier, all right? Forcing, it's like, he's literally a cyborg. He's literally like gone against his human biology to try and extract more power, right? But as you do this, as you keep trying to force your agenda, well, eventually it's going to break you down. On the flip side, if you just chill out and access what you really want, then you're going to be able to unleash some insane power in life. Okay? So let's see. Dopamine industrial complex. That's right. Okay. So, how do we access these deeper desires? That's the next big question, because this is not obvious, right? Like, sometimes we can just ask ourselves this, right? Sometimes we can just say, hey, what do I really want when all things are considered? All right. Well, if you get an answer, just do that. And if you do that, guess what? You're going to be able to take good action in a way that it's not even stressful. It's like the energy that you spent was just accessing the answer, right? That's where the willpower is used. Because if it's coming from a true, authentic place, well, then the action then comes rather effortlessly, generally speaking. So instead of, this hyperlogical logic emotion action where we force everything through, we're going to instead be putting emotion at the top. And that's kind of like our emotions and our intuition and stuff like that. That's kind of like the charismatic Captain Kirk. Okay. And then we are still going to use logic, but we're going to see logic as a tool of emotion. And you can even take like an evolutionary psychology view of this, in the sense that like our limbic system is much older than our, big fat prefrontal cortex. Like, we have our instincts, right? And then our like logical ability is just a way to augment the pursuit of our instinctual, emotional drives. So that then becomes kind of like this first mate Spock. And so, that's what we're doing, is like our emotions, sometimes they come out kind of stupid and primitive, right? And that's will be like the compulsions and things like that, or just like desires that might seem irrational, but we can use logic then to clean those desires up. And if any of you watched any of my videos on dignity, I put a lot of emphasis on this idea that all of our desires are ultimately good. It's just that sometimes they're not logically expressed well, So like the guy who smacks his wife after she says something he doesn't like, ultimately has a good desire there. Probably what he wants is peace. He wants fairness. He wants, some relaxation, or he wants harmony in the family. But the way that he's pursuing it is like, I'm going to dominate her into submission, which is obviously a bad idea. So it's like, you want to take that good impulse, whatever it is in there, righteousness, justice, whatever, and untwist it. And we use logic to untwist it. It's like, well, what's the better way for you to have your wife treat you in a way that you would like? Well, maybe you're going to have to make some changes like X, Y, and Z, right? And so that's what we have to do with our logic. It works for our emotions. And then that can lead to very harmonious, aligned internal action. So then we run into a problem, okay? What if you don't know what you want? Or maybe you do know, but you're afraid to pursue it, or you don't know how to pursue it. And like your desire then starts, like this whole chain gets disrupted. And this is where things got to go a little bit deeper, because if our whole system's built upon accessing our true desires, if we're having trouble doing that and holding it in a way that's productive, well, then the whole system grinds to a halt, right? It can get very messy very quickly. And this is where a lot of guys come to me in coaching, because like they know what they want to have happen, but like something's not clear, right? Like, or maybe they don't know. They're just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life. And then they're just stuck then. And so we got to talk about the trap of what you know. So what you know is a closed circle. All right. It's a contained space. And what you don't know is everything outside of it. And the problem with the what you know amount is that you don't know everything. Okay. A lot of times you don't know anything about the future. You don't know everything about the past. You don't know like what you want. Sometimes you don't know the answer to questions. There's a lot of things that fall outside of this circle in the what you don't know space. And a lot of people, they get stuck in here, and bad things happen then. Basically, you start to consume yourself because you're functioning in a closed system. And some of you guys may be familiar with this symbol. It's called Ouroboros. I think that's how you pronounce it, Ouroboros. It's the snake that eats itself, and it's an ancient symbol. And it's often talked about in a favorable light, especially like when I was like studying all the occultism stuff and that kind of thing. It's like seen as a symbol of knowledge, of harmony, of overcoming duality and all this other kind of stuff. But what I've found is that really what it is a symbol of the masturbatory pursuit of endless knowledge as the answer to life. Because what ends up happening is like what they try and do is they try to expand what they know so that they have more power. But the problem is you're never going to know everything, and you're always going to keep running into this limit. And then if you keep only operating on what you know, then you're in a closed loop. You are in a system that you're not really free. Things are deterministic then, at least in my view. Because if you're just doing the same old thing, operating on the knowledge that you have, then you don't actually have any control over whether something different happens, whether something new happens. You're entirely at the mercy of the universe to give you something new, give you the answer. And so if you're stuck in a position where you don't know the answer and you have no way of breaking out of what you know, then you're stuck there perpetually, indefinitely, unless, God decides to throw you a bone, or, say the non-deterministic, chaotic nature of the universe just luckily works in your favor, and then something changes. And so when I realized this, I kind of started feeling like, hey, this is a trap here. There's an issue with this obsession with knowing. And the biggest issue is that when you focus on everything that you know and you put overemphasize your energy there, is that you're going to start to worry about things. And worry is a huge drain on your willpower and on your general quality of life. Because what ends up happening is when you are obsessed with what you know and afraid of what you don't, then life becomes very scary. It becomes very difficult to do things. It feels like, every single step must be calculated perfectly. And in a lot of ways, perfectionism is the result of this kind of thing. It's the result of trying to know things that you can't know. And since you can't know them and you're all just, in your little hidey hole of your own understanding, then you don't want to take risks. You don't want to venture out because, you're leaving that security of what you know. Okay. And this is a massive stunter, and it's a big thing that'll keep people from, really starting anything. So there's a story here I want to share with you guys. It's called the Maybe Story. And some of you have probably heard this one before. Sometimes it's called the story of the Chinese farmer. I think this is Alan Watts doing this. I'll put all the links.
Once upon a time, there was a Chinese.
All the ups and downs in life, he didn't judge them, right? This is like a kind of like a Zen or a Buddhist story around non-judgment. And it highlights a really important fact, which is we don't know exactly what things are good for us and what things are bad for us. What seemingly bad things could lead to potentially good things and stuff like that. And so this relationship with the unknown is, I would say, pretty essential if we want to be able to figure out how to maximize the usage of our willpower. Because when we account for this, it changes the way that we approach the whole process. So let me explain this, what I mean. I'll probably take my face off. All right. So we got what we know, and this is where a lot of us are trapped. And what we got to do is we got to create a gap. We've got to create a gap here. And how do we do that? How do we create a gap in our attachment to the knowledge of what we know so that we can start working with what we don't? And I have a few things here because there is this idea of the absurdity of a truly free act. And I generated these by talking with ChatGPT, but this is actually a relatively well-known philosophical concept. So we'll start with Dostoevsky here, okay? And he says, he argues that true free will is often exercised through irrational choices, precisely because rationality and logic become forms of determinism. That's what I was saying, it becomes this snake that kind of eats itself. He critiques the idea that humans act purely based on reason or self-interest, suggesting that sometimes people deliberately act against their best interests just to prove that they can. Remember Joey, right? For little Billy from that show thing we watched, where it's he doesn't do anything anyone tells him he should do, right? That's just a natural part of who we are, I think. At least if you have a bit of a rebellious or ambitious spirit inside of you, which I think probably most of you do. And he suggests then that this ability to go against the path presented to you is kind of like the essence of true freedom. What man wants is simply independent choice, whatever that independence may cost and wherever it may lead. You could literally go and look back at, the founding of America, or at least the story that we tell about the founding of America. It's people went to war and killed a lot of people just so that they didn't have to have England tell them what to do. Right? People argue it's about money or whatever, but at least this is how they sold it to the masses. It was about independence. And at least for the common man, that was enough to die for. So that says something about our nature, I think. Next one here, Kierkegaard. The existentialist precursor also explored the idea that true freedom may come from an irrational leap of faith. He argued that rationality cannot fully capture the essence of human experience or existence, and sometimes the only truly free choice is to embrace the absurd, such as faith in God, without logical justification. And so this is one of those things that anyone who's a theist, I believe, they have to make this leap at some point. They have to decide that I'm simply going to believe in something, even though I don't know that it exists. And I would say that this is true for almost pursuit of any complex good in your life. Unless you know exactly how to do it, Like, what are you going to do? Just not work toward it? You're not going to take a chance? You don't want to believe that it could be possible? And a lot of times the things that we think are absurd actually are totally doable, right? Like, people probably thought, like, you go back a couple hundred years and you say, yeah, we're going to put people on the moon, and looks like we might even be able to put people on Mars. They're going to be like, no, that's crazy. That's impossible. But it starts with a willingness to enter into the potentially absurd, which requires you to leave this confines of what you know. Here's what Sartre said about it. He said, he emphasized radical freedom, claiming that humans are condemned to be free. While Sartre didn't explicitly argue that only irrational choices are free, he did argue that we must define our own essence through acts of choice, often in defiance of external logic, societal expectations, or even our own past, right? Because if you're trapped, like a lot of guys, they do this, they'll get trapped in this idea of who they have been. They're like, oh, well, this is how I succeeded in the past. This is how I failed in the past. This is how I've repeatedly failed in the past. And they let themselves be defined by what was in the past. And then they're closing themselves off to what they don't know about who they could actually potentially become. And so, like, the key idea here, that kind of links these guys, is that rationality often binds people to deterministic, i.e. not free patterns. And true freedom may lie in making choices that defy logic, necessity, or even personal benefit simply because one can. So I didn't need to add that last sentence, but so is copy and paste. So what does this mean? Let's go back to this model here, because this is where I think it starts getting the most interesting. So here we go. We want to create this gap in what we know so that we can start working with what we don't. And so we got to use our willpower to create this space. And what that does is that allows us to start working with the good that we don't know. The good that we don't know. So what's this all about? Well, we go back here, we look at this. What's this look like? It looks like a halo. And what do we see here? Halos. Now, there's a lot of talk about what the halo symbolizes, but for me, in my own kind of journey here, I believe that the halo, it represents the person who has created a space to the good that they don't know, i.e. faith in something higher. And they have a direct access to the things that they don't know, this chaotic good potential in the universe, in existence, and they bring it into their consciousness. That's what I think the halo is. And like, it's not just Christianity. Here's a picture of the Buddha like this, and I'm sure other traditions as well have similar sorts of things. And it's like the realm of the intuitive, the realm of the spiritual, the realm of like, something greater beyond consciousness, from what I can tell. And there's also a very weird kind of mathematical thing that I stumbled across while I was looking at this. This is kind of like more of a side fun point. But there's this thing called the Riemann sphere. And so what this is imagine, and it's like really important for like mathematics and quantum computing and all this other kind of stuff. Like, you have the set of all like numbers, like normal numbers, we can call them like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then like negative numbers, 0, 0, negative 1, negative 2, okay? Like, imagine all those. But then also there's these things called imaginary numbers, okay? And imaginary numbers are numbers that don't seem to exist in a normal sense, but they seem to be very useful and work in a mathematical sense. So these would be the things like the square root of a number, like the square root of a negative number. So like -9, normally you can't get the square root of a -9 normally, because if you do -3 times -3, then that's going to be +9. And then obviously 3 times 3 is also +9. So it's like, how do you get the square root of -9? You can't. You have to have these things called imaginary numbers. So imagine we've got all these numbers, we got all the real ones, and we've got these things called imaginary numbers all in this massive plane that stretches out into infinity on all sides. What if we wanted to contain that? What if we wanted to put that into a shape? And that is what the Riemann sphere is. Okay. And what it does is it folds all of these potential numbers into one thing by putting infinity at the very top. And so by doing this, I see that as kind of like the mathematical version of the halo. The halo is the thing that allows you to tap into the infinity of the potential good that you don't know. Okay. And again, that's me making jumps and leaps in a probably unfair way because I'm not a mathematician, but I just thought that was very cool and worth sharing. So where does this leave us? You need to create space for God, aka the infinite potential for good that you don't yet know, to freely pursue what you truly want. Because otherwise, you're going to be trapped in the prison of what you do know, right? So we have to create a puncture in that. And so that's a leap of faith, right? And that is, in my opinion, a free choice because in a sense, it's kind of absurd. It's kind of crazy to take it seriously. And so, yeah, we're going against logic, against determinism, and it's a free choice and often one that we have to make that, and it hurts us. It's made in the face of suffering. So for example, like when I felt probably the freest choices that I have ever made in my life that felt truly free were when I was in a really bad spot, like life crashing down kind of thing, like immense pain and suffering. And I could either choose to believe that goodness existed and to keep working toward it, or I could not. Now, the problem with me choosing to believe that goodness existed and keep working toward it meant that I would have to suffer even more. And it's that presence of suffering, that desire to choose good, even when rationally speaking, it was a dumb idea because I could have saved myself a lot of pain if I didn't decide to go that route. That's what felt the most free. And that's like this kind of point of absurdism, that step into the unknown, that, opening of the halo, as it were, that I think where we start getting at a core mechanic of true free will. So how are we going to practice this now? How are we going to actually engage in willpower maxing? So to remind ourselves, our goal here is to generate the highest positive return on willpower spent and sense of freedom gained. So we got a formula, and it's super simple. In fact, the whole reason I kind of did all of this stuff, I went so deep into these different things, was because the formula is so simple that you just want to dismiss it immediately. And what I found is that I'm a dense sort of midwit in a sense, where it's like I need things to be like very simple and true things to be made more complicated before I can actually accept them. So that's why I did so much lead up to this. And the formula is do what you truly want and don't worry. That's it. If you want to get the most out of your willpower, spend your willpower on doing what you truly want, accessing your true desires. So that's going to take some energy. And then don't worry, because that's also going to take some energy. And that's what you want to spend your willpower on. And if you do this, I believe that you'll get maximum return on investment and live the freest life that you can possibly live. So let's break each of these steps down, make them a little more complex so you can get them a little bit better. So start with the do what you truly want piece. So remember this, we talked about Aleister Crowley. His whole thing was do what thou wilt. That is the whole of the law. Okay, well, that was actually, I think, lifted in part from St. Augustine, who said something very similar long before. And he said, love and do what you will. Not just do what you will, love and do what you will. For the soul who has trained to love God will do nothing to offend the beloved. And so this is the idea of getting to the heart of what you truly want, is that you have to love yourself enough. You have to realize that what you want is something so good, right? You want something more than just your immediate impulses satisfied. You want heaven, right? You want absolute perfect bliss, and you want the best path possible to heaven. You want as much heaven as you possibly can, as much as you can until you're dead and in heaven. That's what you want. And like loving, willing that greatest good, that is, I believe, what love is. You know, it's like the will to have the greatest possible good for yourself. And what would be even better than that would be to have the greatest possible good for everyone, and to like aim for the whole box, and to like look inside of yourself and start from there and then work backwards. Right. So, you know, what's the most good thing that I could do in any given, that could happen in any given situation? You know, like what's, like, I call it the highest conception of good. So the highest conception of good for this stream, that's what I aim for. It's like, I hope I transform someone's life. I hope that this goes viral and it does great for the business. I hope that I love making it, which I did. It's like, you know, I aim for the best. You know, you got to be willing to open up your heart and try and figure out, what do you really want? And what you really want is always something exceptionally good, if you're being honest with yourself. So what do? You want to do what you truly want. So we want to spend our willpower connecting with and discovering what you legitimately want in a given situation, rather than spending your willpower on what you are immediately compelled to crave. Okay, so that's not where we want to be. We don't want to be operating up here in our impulses and our reactions. We want to, I call it the heart shift, move down into our heart and figure out what the heck we really want in that scenario. We also don't want to be spending our energy repressing negative emotions, because, as we said before, that's just going to lead to everything just spilling out all over the floor later, right? And we don't want to be spending our energy on forcing action. If we're having to force action, that means that our emotions, they're in the way, right? We're trying to logic our way through this thing, and we're ignoring what we actually want in the situation and getting down to the root of what we really want and learning how to work with that. And another thing that people waste an insane amount of time and energy on is on getting upset about their circumstances. Like, I see this all the time with coaching guys, is like, I'll be like, hey, so, you know, what brought you here today? And they'll just kind of go on a tirade sort of vent, which I'm cool with, because like I expect this and it's actually good for the coaching process. But they just talk about everything that's wrong, talk about everything that sucks, they'll talk about the issues that they're running into, they'll talk about, you know, where they're frustrated, X, Y, and Z. But the coaching doesn't really begin until I say, okay, given all that, what do you want? Right? And most people don't actually get to that question. They just stay up here with everything that's going wrong, right? Like if you're someone who ruminates and just complains, or, you know, just some people just kind of let that energy function and just squash it down, but it's all there and it's being yucky. And the only way that you can get past it and really put all of that dissatisfaction energy to positive use is to attach it to a true desire. Like, okay, given everything that is crappy right now, what do you want to have happen? And then all of that frustration of the crappiness, that then can be driven toward achieving the thing that you want to have happen. So some tips for this, some tips for accessing what you truly want. You want to come from a place of love, all right? So you want to be approaching this like with a sense of like, hey, I care about you in here, like talking to yourself. And even all those little discordant voices, because they all have something to say. And you got to and like by interviewing and just talking with them, you're going to be able to discover the things that you actually want. And if you just try and like bulldoze through, it's going to be tricky, right? So have some conversations with yourself. Let it be more of a discovery conversation, rather than like a king on, you know, his throne being like, give me your desire, right? And then, you know, the inside of you is just going to be like, what? And it's not going to give you useful answers. Next thing, relax. We mentioned this already, but like you want to chill out. You know, don't take this so seriously, because if you're tense, that means that there's some forcing, there's some fear, there's some all kinds of stuff going on in there that's going to, you know, throw up psychological interference that's going to prevent you from accessing what you really want. Next thing, give yourself time. So one of the things that I found, so like example from my own life, I was in a pattern there where I would get up and I would kind of just get, you know, stressed out about my day and all the stuff I had to do. And I would spend a little bit too much time scrolling, right? Like checking my social media messages, you know, responding to people, like, you know, going down a YouTube rabbit hole or whatever. And I didn't want to do that. And I kept telling myself, all right, dude, you just don't do that. Don't touch the phone. Don't do anything like that, and just get to work, right? And so I tried to do this, and I just kept not doing it, right? Like I kept like, I know the plan. I'm bought into the plan, but I would wake up and I'd just be so much resistance. It's just like, I don't want to do it. And then I just decided to go slower. I decided to give myself more time because I'm a kind of guy whose brain takes a long time to boot up in the morning. Like I'm not ready to go, at full speed until usually like 9:00 a.m. And I get up at like 6:30. So like it takes me a little while, and my expectation to just get up and go, it just didn't work for me. I needed more time to be able to actually sink into myself and allow my desires to kind of come to the surface. And this is one of those things that applies to anything. It's like, if you don't have the clear answer, don't force anything, especially if you don't need to. Like, don't expect an immediate answer on your true desire. Sometimes you got to chew on it for a little bit. Sometimes you got to like pump yourself up. Sometimes you got to encourage yourself. Allow that space to happen. And what I found is that even if I give myself as much time as I want in the morning to get going, like my current system is like, I don't use the phone in the first thing, or the computer, like surfing. I don't do any of that till like noon. And in that window, I can either work or I can just chill. And a lot of times the chilling, that's what leads to the work, is when I can just kind of sink into myself. I give myself permission, and my mind will naturally start going down and connecting with what I actually want. And then it can just naturally flow into action. But if you try and force the process, you try and make it too quick, it doesn't tend to work out super well. Next thing is aim for direction over perfection. So if you are trying to access what you want and you think you need to have the perfect desire, like crystal clarity, completely laid out and like, yes, that's the $1 million answer. If you're doing that, you might be waiting for way too long. And you might not ever actually get there, because a lot of times you just need to have enough of an idea of what you want, enough to take action with. And this is one of the things that I get really heavily into in my rugged productivity series, if any of you guys have been following that. And I think that that's one's, it's really cool because it's all about how can you just make the directional progress. So as long as you find a direction that you like enough, just go with that. Okay. Just go with that. And that brings us then to our next piece of the formula. Don't worry. Don't worry. So you want to spend willpower. It is worthwhile spending willpower letting go of what you cannot control instead of fighting to eliminate all uncertainty, because that's impossible. You can't do that, okay? And a lot of guys try and do that. That's why so many people get stuck in analysis by paralysis, because they're trying to remove all uncertainty. They're trying to find the crystal clear path that will 100% guaranteed work. Okay? You can't do it. It's not gonna happen, all right? You'd be better off actually just putting your energy into letting go of that desire rather than trying to satisfy it. Obsessing over worst case scenarios. We definitely don't want to be spending time on that. Like, yes, we have to consider these things. That's part of the process of figuring out what you want, is that you run simulations in your mind about like how things might go. And so we want to make contingencies. I'm not saying don't ever consider negative consequences. Of course, we have to do that, but there's a limit. There's a limit to how far we can see, and we have to own that, and we have to be okay with that. We have to remember we got to create this space of connecting to what we don't know and being at peace with it, leaving space for, the potential best case scenario, right, coming in. That's where we want to have our energy. So if we're doing that, then we're not obsessing over the potential bad stuff, because that can all that does is scare you into inaction. Another thing we don't want to be spending our energy on is micromanaging our emotions. So like this don't worry thing, it's like, okay, even if I'm not in the perfect mindset, even if I'm not in the ideal state, even if I'm not achieving this peak sense of resonance, or I'm frustrated, or I'm feeling petty or whatever, it's like, okay, it's fine. You are where you are. Don't get in there and micromanage everything. Like, yeah, you can get curious. You can touch that stuff, see what's going on, see if there's some desire in there that might be useful for you to extract, but don't get lost in it. All right. Just don't worry about it. In a lot of cases, a lot of times that stuff is very fleeting and it's not worth paying attention to anyway. And eventually, like if it keeps coming up repeatedly, yeah, you're going to want to take a look at it. But I've seen some guys that just get so up their own butthole in terms of like overanalyzing every single little emotion inside of them that they just can't do anything. And they waste all their energy doing that rather than on deciding what they truly want to do and then not worrying about it and just taking action. So some tips for not worrying. Here's a big one. Trust that God is good. Now, obviously this one's going to be challenging for anyone who is atheistic or agnostic or whatever, but the whole point here is that if you do believe that God is good, then it makes it really easy to not worry. And this is where you'll figure out how much of a believer you are. Because if you worry a lot, or anytime you worry, fundamentally what you're saying is that God doesn't have my back here. He's gonna let things get horrendous. And when you're in a bad situation with a lot of pain and suffering, that's a tough one. That's the toughest thing I've had to face spiritually, is this belief that like, shit, maybe God isn't good because look at what has happened in my life. Look at what's happening in the world. Like, I don't know if I give him control, is he going to just keep screwing me over? Is he just going to keep the torture going, maybe make it worse and worse and worse? And, if you just choose to not believe that, instead choose to not worry and just trust, just have faith, God is good. He's going to take care of me. It's all going to get paid back. Well, that's going to just cut down so much wasted energy and just let you do what you can do to make things better. Next piece is anabolic optimism. Now, this is from a guide that I wrote years ago, and I'll give you kind of like the first two big points of it. And it goes like this. The first point is this. It's kind of like a radical mindset thing. And I just encourage you to try this on. This is just a tip to play around with. But the first point is the idea that you look at life where every single thing that happens to you is the best possible thing that could ever happen to you. Just try and embrace it like that. It's just that maybe you just don't understand it yet, right? It's kind of like taking the positive side of that, maybe story. It's like maybe it all works out at the end. Maybe all of our pain and suffering actually leads to tremendous things. And then chances are in your own life, you can look at where most of your biggest growth has happened because you suffered. And so if you can learn how to just expect that this is the way things go, that's incredibly powerful. The other piece of anabolic optimism I want to share is this idea that if I don't get what I want, I'm getting something better. I love that perspective because then it allows me to look at the things where they seem to go sideways, and I immediately start thinking like, oh, this is actually better than the thing that I wanted. I just don't know how yet. So you need to keep that halo open. You need to keep this potential for good to come that you don't understand yet. And if you spend willpower doing that, well, then you can just kind of absorb the bumps in the road, and you can immediately capitalize on the opportunities that exist in you, in your life. Because sometimes, even if a situation presents itself as bad, there's almost always some kind of incredible opportunity. At the very least, there's always some opportunity for personal growth that could be insanely valuable to you. Remember your dignity. All right. So one of the big things that keeps guys worrying about stuff is their potential loss of status in life, where it's like, oh, well, if this thing goes bad, well, then, I'm going to lose financial status, or I'm going to lose my relationship status, or my social status, or my whatever. OK. But if you are connected to your dignity, which is separate from your status, your dignity is your sense of inherent worth. Well, then it makes it a lot easier to let go of this stuff and just not worry. Because it's like, hey, no matter what happens, no matter whether I succeed or whether I fail, I'm still good, fundamentally at my core, and I can love myself, and I can keep sacrificing for my own benefit and giving my goodness to the world. And then the final tip would be to flip anxiety into excitement. This one makes a big change into things. So if you notice yourself getting anxious, that's worry, right? And it's going to eat up your energy. It's going to hold you back. It's going to make things worse. This is something that I was literally doing just a little while ago when I was trying to finish this presentation before the stream time. I wasn't able to do it perfectly. I was still a few minutes late, but while I was doing it, I was getting anxious. Shoot, this thing isn't done. I don't know if it's going to all come together. And so instead, I was like, this is exciting. I'm down to the wire. I'm in the movie. I'm the man in the arena. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, best this opponent in front of me, which would be the completion of the presentation, right? And so when I allowed myself to kind of step into this excitement narrative and learning how to lean into the drama of it, it started to become fun. You know, I was like, ooh, I'm curious to see what happens. What is the way that this story unfolds? And when you start embracing this not worrying sort of mentality, things just in life, they become smooth, because it's just like whatever. It's like you don't need to constantly be grasping at control. And what ends up happening is that life becomes kind of like a game with God. At least this is the way I see it, where it's like a ping pong game where God will give you a set of circumstances, you know, and that's him smacking the ping pong ball to you. And then what you do then is you gotta return that serve. And the way you return it is you just do what you want. You know, love and do what you want. You just decide what you truly want when you're connected to your heart of hearts, and you do that thing, and then you don't worry. You let the ball go. And then guess what? God's going to hit it back to you, and you're going to hit it back to him. And it becomes a very wild and exciting journey when you play this way. And that's when it's only from this mentality that life really starts to feel like a game. Any other mentality, calling life a game, especially when you're in the midst of suffering, it's almost insulting. You know, it's a terrible thing. And people they'll get like existentially nihilistic and depressed because of it. But if you can start tapping into this, you can just do what you truly want and not worry about things, then you're going to take off like a rocket, because all your energy then, you know, is just going to be funneled toward the best outcomes possible. So that's pretty much what I have for you in this one. But like, here's what I'll say is that like this core concept, it's at the root of everything that I do. And if you want a framework to plug yourself into that'll like let you magnify this even further, then I want you to check out the training that I have in the link of the description here, because it's a free training and it gives you an idea of like, how can we like turn this into a discipline? How can we create some tools that really allow us to take this leveraged willpower and leverage it even more? How can we like, you know, do that? And so that's what I break down for you. And this is what I use in the Frontline Man program. And guys are getting absolutely incredible results with it, you know, from all over the world. They're quitting porn. They're getting, you know, tripling their productivity, sometimes even more. They're, you know, boosting their income. They're building relationships. They're saving marriages. They're getting first girlfriends. They're, you know, guys getting in shape, quitting weed, quitting alcohol. Like the results are just blowing me away. And so I'm incredibly honored to even be able to attach my name to something like this. But I think a lot of you guys would probably really like it. So I highly encourage you to click the link, you know, watch that, and, you know, it'll give you some next steps on how to move into the working with us if you're interested. So thanks guys for tuning in, and hopefully you enjoyed it. So let's see what the chat now here has to say. Actually, I'm gonna look at it over on YouTube here. If anyone's got any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the chat. Ehab, like the interpretation of the halo. Yeah, I just like that connection kind of came to me today, and I was like, ooh, that clicks. That clicks. James Watson says, by the way, Aleister Crowley also discusses the true will. Yeah, those guys go pretty deep. I never got super into his stuff. I thought his writing style was kind of hard to consume, and so I didn't go very heavily into his thing, but probably be worth looking at when I get interested in that sort of thing again. Orbital Hub says, can't rush my art either. Yeah. Create a drama-free zone for creative energy. That's like super huge. And the thing is, so like as an artist or whatever, like anyone who does creative work, until you can get rid of the worry, you're not going to be doing your best work. It just doesn't work. It doesn't function like that. You can use the pressure of a deadline or something to like enhance the energy, but if you're in there anxious, there's no way that you're going to be able to access your highest like creative inspiration. And the thing is, we're all artists in a sense, because we're all making creative choices about our own life. And so if you're making a big decision in your life, as much as possible, try and do it free from a place of worry and truly from like this place of like security, curiosity, and just doing what you truly want. Cedric says, how are you dealing with this complex aim in unstable political context we're currently in? I don't see how I can implement and practice what you suggest while the world state is like it is. I think that's bullshit. I think that's an excuse. I think you're probably watching too much news, because the reality is the politics in the world at large are probably not directly affecting you, unless you're like, one of those governmental employees that Doge is currently, kicking out of their jobs, or you're getting deported. Like in general, for a lot of us, this stuff doesn't really have anything to do with us. And it's really about like, it's just about like, well, what do you want to do? And even if you were getting directly impacted by this stuff, say, Elon Musk like kicks down the door of your house and takes your money and says, hey, you're an idiot and now you're fired. Okay. Say he does that. Given that, what do you want to do now? That's all you got to do is like, okay, given that, what do I want to do? Well, I probably want to get another job, and I want to get a job that I like. And you go from there. Luke says, I'm reading Indistractable by Nir Eyal at the moment. My cousin actually mentioned that book to me. Great insight into why we do the things that don't benefit us and how to handle internal triggers in healthy ways. I'll have to check that out. Thanks, John X. Orbital Hub. Yeah, champions turn anxiety into excitement 100%. You got to. If you want to operate at the high level, there's always going to be stakes. So there's going to be emotional energy flowing. There's no way to do anything meaningful to yourself and not have some emotional spikes. And so it's like the winning mindset's the guy who can be like, this is freaking sweet, right? As soon as, like, you can see it. Like, I'm an Eagles fan from Philly and whatnot, but like, I can't deny that Tom Brady is a monster, in the clutch situation, because he's someone who like, he thrives in it. You can tell he relishes being the guy who has things riding on him. And it's like all of the greats, all the GOATs, they know how to do that. They know how to take the pressure of the moment and turn it into better performance, because they use it to get excited rather than scared. Lewis says, how can you change your breathing if you feel anxious but want to convert it into excitement? I don't know how to do it from breathing technique methodology, because I think it's more of a mental shift. The way that I do it mentally is I kind of step back from my life and look at it as if I was watching a movie. So I know, like, you don't want to live kind of like that, because that's what some people call disassociation. And it's a very unpleasant state where you feel like you're not actually living your life. But if you can pop out for a moment and you can view your life like a book, well, then it becomes interesting, because like drama is only interesting to the extent to which you don't know what's going to happen. And the more that you want to find out what happened, the more the stakes are there, then the more exciting it is. It's like, that's why shows like to end on a cliffhanger, because then you have to get to the next scene. It's like, oh, I really want to see what happens. And so if you can bring that to your own life, you can look at your own story and be like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen here. Let's find out. I want to find out. Right. And if you do that, then that seems to be what helps me make that shift. Lucas says, what kind of mindset would you suggest for non-Christian people? So in terms of not worrying, that one, there's a couple ways to go about it. One of them is a little dangerous. The obvious one is just be like, well, if God doesn't exist, then meaning is just made up anyway. And for me, that led me to existential nihilism, which was not a pleasant place for me to operate in. But other people seem to be able to operate quite fine there. They're like, fine, I'm cool just creating my own meaning and realizing that it's just mine and no one else's and has ties to nothing objective. And so if you're in that case, then it's about you realizing that like you can change your meaning then. You can change what matters. You can decide that this not working out doesn't matter. It's okay. And then you can use that to not worry. That would be one way to do it. I'd have to know more about your actual beliefs to probably offer more insight. Orbital says, do you know any methods to transmute sexual energy from your lower wards to your creative action? Yes. And that's something that I've done like a really deep dive into in my sexual transmutation workshop. And the key to it is learning how to like sexualize the goal, which is a weird thing to say. But basically what you do is you imagine that kind of like your ideal woman, AKA, which becomes your muse, is watching you. And what you want to do then is be like, all right, I'm going to do something here that impresses my ideal woman. And if you can make that kind of mental connection, then that can help. But in general, you don't even need to do that. That's kind of like more for the cerebral guy who is in his head a lot. In general, actual raw sexual energy can be very easily transmuted just by getting and taking action, because that's what it's designed to do anyway. So you just got to like just get into that flow state. And usually if you've got a sexual charge inside of you, it's going to make that flow state more intense, and you're going to be able to perform better. Da Vinci says, your content has been a game changer for me over the years. I appreciate the effort you put into this stuff. Curious if you've ever watched any of Mike Israetel's Making Progress channel. Nope, not familiar with him. I don't really consume self-improvement content anymore. I went through a period where I read every self-help book that I possibly could. And it got to the point where everybody was kind of saying the same stuff over and over again. And I also just kind of wanted to not do that. I wanted to be able to say original things. And sometimes in order to do that, you kind of just need to stay in your own lane. Otherwise, like I guess the danger is that you risk rediscovering the wheel in a sense, but it also gives you kind of like the clarity to do your own thing and make your own decisions and make your own like leaps and things like that. So I don't really consume too much of other people's stuff. No knock on them. It's just not something that I feel compelled to do unless I find someone who's saying something that's new and interesting. Like I really followed Jordan Peterson's stuff for a while because he was saying stuff I hadn't heard before. And from what I can tell, like his whole Maps of Meaning book is brilliant, you know, like that. I think that was like a truly brilliant work of philosophy. So, you know, his 12 rules for life and those things, they're all right. But like the deep shit that he does, like when I first started like getting into that and like hearing him deconstruct, you know, the whole leftist ideology, that was new thing. So I was like, oh, okay, nice. So if I can find people doing new stuff, I get really hooked really quick. James says, I have had anger issues on longer streaks and depression, etc. on the flat line. What's the strat? So I recommend you watch my previous, I think it was the last stream or the one, I can't remember. I think there was one before that where I talk about the stages of reboot. But basically what you want to do is look into seeing like, well, what are you angry about? Chances are if you're quitting porn and all this anger rises up, that anger was there anyway, and you're using porn to squash it down. And so you got to figure out, well, let's talk to this emotion, this anger here. Hey, buddy, how you doing? I see you're angry. I'm sorry about that. What do you want to have happen? And if you can figure out the desire behind that anger, then you can start satisfying that desire. And you can use all that anger energy to drive toward it. And when you do that, well, then you're going to start creating a life that you don't want to escape from, which makes it a lot easier to quit porn. Welcome, Lucas. Orbital says, how important is keto carnivore? Magnesium and sleep, worth the effort. If you don't want to do them, no reason to force yourself to. I've done keto I did it for like 14 days, 14 days. And like, yeah, the mental clarity is pretty sick, but I also felt like kind of lightheaded. I didn't feel as good in energy wise, like in terms of like physical energy. And I took a lot of salts and electrolytes and shit like that. And my workouts just kind of sucked. So I didn't like that. And a similar thing with carnivore. And I just don't feel like not eating carbs ever again. So it's like maybe as a stint here and there, I might do it if I have some specific reason. But I mean, you can just eat generally healthy and also see incredible benefits and still have like, you know, a range of different kinds of foods and things. Like I don't eat perfect by any means. So, however, I've never eaten perfect for an extended period of time. So I can't tell you what's on the other side of that, but I don't know. My little experiments didn't provide enough evidence that it was worth it going through it for the long term. Magnesium and supplements, those kinds of things, they're really person dependent. And, generally just hitting the basics probably does a lot more than trying to major in the minors, as it were. Like there is a few supplements that actually do things, but none of them are going to do as much as getting regular exercise, getting good sleep, eating relatively healthy, and having goals that you give a shit about, you know, and making sure that you connect with people, making sure that you have like legitimate downtime and recreation that you actually enjoy. Like these things are all going to give you way more results than what your supplement stack is. You know, obviously if you're trying to be a bodybuilder, well, then things start getting a little bit different, but yeah. All right, guys. Well, it was great chatting with y'all. Thanks for tuning into the stream. I'm going to see you guys again next week. And yeah, let's keep rolling with this. So, ooh-yop, everybody. Catch you later. Peace.